Okay, it's a bit loud. I guess I should start with an introduction. My name is Neil Mammen, and I was just wondering if there's a way to make it less dim there. That's fine. My name is Neil Mammen. I am an immigrant. I was born in Ghana in Africa, and then I lived in Ethiopia, Yemen, Sudan, Jamaica. My parents are from India. And I came to the United States to go to college. I went to Oregon State University, which is, I got a degree, a bachelor's and a master's in electrical engineering, computer engineering, and solid-state physics, so all that stuff. I then went down to Silicon Valley, where I started 4 companies. None of them made me rich, but they were a lot of fun. And we would design, so we designed, I and a friend of mine designed the very first MP3 player in 1991. That was the very first one, hardware one that was ever made. And then in 1994, we were the first ones to send MPEG video over the internet to homes. Again, none of these companies became big because they were too early. Way too early. If you know, MPEG video didn't become, Netflix didn't come till much later. So we were probably 10 years ahead of our time. And so none of the companies were big, but the ideas were planted. And then the most recent one that you probably would know is I worked for Dolby Labs for about 10 years. And at Dolby Labs, I was the hardware architect for Dolby Vision. So if you go buy a TV that says Dolby Vision, I'm the guy who designed the hardware for it. So that's my background there. So anyway, that gives you at least some of my background. My father was a communist and an atheist. And my uncles were all famous Marxists in India, because the Marxists had come to India. But my family actually dates its heritage as Christians back to 51 AD when St. Thomas came to India. And so our family comes from the church called the Mar Thoma Church, Church of St. Thomas. But my father's generation were mainly Marxists. My father became a Christian when I was about 5, and he was a professor in physics. So I grew up in a very scientific home, very biblically based home, which was a blessing for me. So that kind of gives you my background. Today I want to talk about, so I started a ministry called No Blind Faith. And the No Blind Faith ministry basically is focused on teaching you apologetics. And because our basis for it is we don't want you to, actually, let's see. Do I need to turn this on? Probably, yeah, there we go. So I believe, so what I teach is I teach something called apologetics. Apologetics is the defense of Christianity using science, logic, history, archaeology, and philosophy. And I call my ministry No Blind Faith is because you should never have blind faith in anything. Because if you have blind faith, then what's the difference between you and the Muslim, who also has blind faith? There has to be something that differentiates your faith from their faith. What is that? That's going to be facts, logic, history, science, and philosophy, right? So it's got to be rational. So I believe using all that, I can prove to you that it's more rational and logical to believe that God exists using science. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about how to argue with an atheist, and then I'm going to give you facts and pointers. If you're an atheist here today, I welcome you to listen, and then we can do a Q&A afterwards. So the first thing I do is God exists using science. I actually wrote a book called Who is Agent X? Subtitle, Proving Science and Logic Show It's More Rational to Think God Exists. Boris, where are you? If I'm going too fast, wave at me. Am I going too fast or I'm okay? Maybe a bit slower, okay. So the second thing is I prove that the New Testament is accurate using archaeology, history, and manuscript evidence. I can prove to you that what we have today is what they wrote 2,000 years ago. And number 3, I prove to you that Jesus really existed using history. I don't even use the Bible to prove that he existed. And number 4, I prove that Jesus rose from the dead using all the above as well as science and logic. And then number 5, I talk about why evil actually exists and why it actually proves a good God exists. And we actually did that talk last week on Tuesday, right here for the youth. Why does actually evil prove that God exists, not disprove that God exists? Okay, so today's topic is who is Agent X? Proving that it's more reasonable to believe God exists without using the Bible. Why do I start with no Bible? Let me get this out of here first. Why is no Bible? Why is this important? Well, this is important when you're proving God exists because you can't use the Bible to prove the Bible. It can be circular reasoning. It doesn't have to be circular reasoning, but it can be circular reasoning. If you say, well, the Bible says God exists and God says you read the Bible, then how do you know God really exists apart from something? 2, atheists don't believe the Bible is true, so you can't start there. Now, it's always good to quote the Bible because the Word of God always goes out fruitful. But when you're arguing with somebody, when you're trying to explain the reasons for the faith you have, you can't use the Bible because imagine the Bhagavad Gita. Imagine you're sitting one day at a restaurant eating a nice hamburger and a Hindu guy comes to you, an Indian Hindu guy comes to you and he says this. He says, eating beef is murder. You should not be doing that. Let me explain that in English. Eating beef is murder. You should not be doing that. Right now, and you say, well, why is it murder? And they says, well, because the Bhagavad Gita says so. Well, do you care what the Bhagavad Gita says? No, you don't. So why would you care that it says eating beef is murder? Now, if you were an atheist and somebody says the Bible says this, it's the same thing as you with the Bhagavad Gita. You don't care, so it's not going to make any difference to you. Okay. By the way, we just don't know is not a valid alternative theory. I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to, before I start, I got to give you the ground rules and the introduction, because this is a heavy topic. So a lot of times I've been talking to my atheist friends, and I get through this whole presentation, and they say, well, we just don't know. There's so much we don't know, we just don't know. This is not a good excuse. Imagine you're in court. The prosecution says the murderer was identified as the defendant. Witnesses said the murderer had blue eyes, dark hair, and a scar. The defendant had a motive, an opportunity, and we found the still smoking gun in his car. Then the defense stands up and says, well, Your Honor, we can't conclude that. Maybe aliens did it. We just don't know. Right? This is not a good answer. Right? You have to refute the existing data and show why it's not valid or insufficient evidence, not complain, we just don't know. Right? So I'll get to the end of this, and a lot of my atheist friends will go, well, we don't know. I'm like, no. I presented you an argument. Right? Any single point in the argument may not be sufficient and may have alternative explanations. Somebody threw the gun in his car, other people have blue eyes, the victim had other enemies, but when you add them all up, blue eyes, scar, motive, opportunity, gun, then the entire case has explanatory power, and any jury in the world would find it reasonable evidence to convict. So we're looking for the most reasonable answer. And if you disagree, you have to refute, and I'll talk about how you refute an argument. Okay, this talk will be a bit technical, and you'll hear a few concepts that may dazzle your mind, but I'm going to go through 4 major points. And if you don't understand what those points are, as long as you understand what those conclusions are, you can always go back and study what those points are, okay? So sync up with me on when we do a summary, and then you'll be okay. But if you get points like, well, how did he get there from there? Well, the evidence is there, and you'll be able to go back and look it up. Okay, let's start with this. If the Bible is true, what is the greatest miracle ever? You can yell it out. Some people say resurrection, some people say creation. Well, the reality is it's really creation, right? Because if the creation story in Genesis 1 is true, then every other miracle in the Bible is plausible, impossible, and probable. As you'll see, if God can create life, matter, energy, time, and everything, then raising somebody from the dead is actually an easy miracle, right? It's not a big deal for him. If he can create life, then he can raise somebody from the dead. Secondly, can the supernatural happen? Is there a supernatural? Well, my atheist friends don't believe in the supernatural. If you don't believe the supernatural can happen, you'll never believe any of the Bible's claims, especially not the resurrection. But after this presentation, you will not be able to say there is no supernatural and be scientifically correct, because I'm going to give you a scientific basis for the supernatural. Okay. Here's what we're going to cover. From this point on, by the way, we'll only look at the scientific data. We're not going to use the Bible for any evidence from this point on. The last time I'll refer to the Bible on how it corresponds with the scientific evidence, but I will not use it for evidence, okay? So here's what we're going to cover today. Oh, by the way, I should add this. There are only 2 ways to refute an argument. let's say I'm arguing with you, and I say this, because of this, and therefore this. And you say, well, I don't agree. Well, that's not a refutation. You haven't destroyed my argument. The only way to refute an argument, there are only two ways. You have to prove either the facts, you have to prove either the facts are wrong or incomplete, or the logic is faulty. There is no other way to refute an argument. Make sense? You can't refute an argument except you show the facts are wrong. If you're ever in an argument with anybody about anything, and you lay out a case, this leads to this leads to this, and this is the conclusion, and they say, well, I don't accept it, or I don't know. No. You've not refuted my argument. Show me my argument is wrong. The only way you can show me my argument is wrong is show me the facts are wrong or the logic is wrong. That's the only way. So if you ever in an argument, kids, ever in an argument with your parents, use that. Okay, I'm sorry, parents, but Okay, here's what we're going to cover today. 1, where did the universe come from? And 2, what can we derive about the cause of the universe from science? We don't need 100% proof, right? We just want to find the most reasonable answer to this question, right? I can't prove 100% that you are really sitting there, and I'm not just imagining that you're sitting there. In fact, you can't prove 100. There's some things that you can't even prove science with science. You can't prove the scientific method using science. Think about it, right? But it is the most reasonable answer. So we have to come to the most reasonable answer to the question, and that's what we're looking for. Let's start with this. One of the things I talk about is I'm going to talk about multiple universes. Now, for the kids, this is not a problem, especially if you watch Spider-Man or Marvel comics and the movies. Everybody knows the multiverse. When I created this argument about 20 years ago, nobody had heard about the multiverse. So for those parents who don't know what the multiverse is, let me explain. This is the Earth. We're in the solar system. The solar system is in the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy is in the local group. The local group is in the local supercluster. The local supercluster is in the universe. None of these are multiverses. This is all our one universe, right? So this is our universe, right? When we talk about other universes, multiverses, they are not part of our universe. They came into being separately and independently. They don't intersect, interact, or interfere with our universe. They are out there somewhere. Okay? So whenever I talk about multiverses, I'm not talking about this universe. I'm not talking about galaxies. I'm not talking about superclusters. Okay. So let's start. Ready? There are 4 major points that we're going to cover today. Remember I said I'm going to come to 4 points? This is the first point. Here's the first point. The first point is the universe is not eternal. So 80 years ago, atheists, people who don't believe God exists, said, everything which has a beginning has a cause, and anything that existed forever needs no cause. Now, this is true. In fact, it should be self-evident. Why is it self-evident? Because if something has existed forever, there was no point at which it did not exist. Thus, there is nothing that precedes it. Therefore, nothing could have caused it, because to cause something, you have to precede it causally, not casually, but causally or temporally in time. Make sense? So, scientists and philosophers agree that anything that has existed forever logically needs no cause. Everybody with me so far? Right? If something exists forever, it's always been there. Nothing can come before it. Nothing can cause it. Right? Atheists said that. We agreed with them. Then the atheists would say the second point they had is that the universe had no beginning and has existed forever. So atheists would then say, therefore the universe what? Needs what? No cause. Now, Christians, on the other hand, theists, said this. They said everything which has a beginning has a cause. Anything that exists forever needs no cause. We agreed with the atheist on this point. It makes sense. It's logical. It's rational. But when you got to the second point, we did not say the universe had no beginning. What do we say? We said what? God had no beginning and has existed forever, right? So what does that conclude? What does that mean? That means what? God needs no cause. Make sense? So the atheists and the theists were kind of fighting on this. They'd say, where did God come from? We'll say, he's always been there. He doesn't need a cause. And he didn't have a beginning. And they'd say, well, we'd say, where did the universe come from? And they'd say, well, it's always been there. It doesn't have a cause. It doesn't need a beginning. right? This, by the way, is called the cosmological argument, right? Now, here's where you have to be very careful. This is not the cosmological argument. I've heard a few people call it the cosmological argument. You have to know the difference, because the cosmological argument goes like this. Everyone who needs a hairdresser has hair, and anyone that has no hair needs no hairdresser. The second part of the cosmological argument is Gandhi has no hair. So what is the conclusion? Therefore, Gandhi needs no hairdresser, right? So it's very important that you don't confuse the cosmological argument with the cosmological argument. This is the cosmological argument. That is not. Okay, so the cosmological argument, everything which has a beginning has a cause. Anything that existed forever needs no cause. And whoops, and then the universe had no beginning and existed forever. And that's what they believed until about 80 years ago, when a guy named Hubble was looking through the Hooker telescope. I know you think he was looking through the Hubble telescope. He wasn't famous yet, so they hadn't called a telescope after him. He was looking through the Hubble telescope, and he noticed something very interesting. He noticed that when he looked at certain galaxies, they were redder than they should have been. You go, well, how do we know what color they should have been? Well, they'd been studying galaxies, and they knew that most galaxies of a certain size, certain shape, had certain color. Well, they noticed that these galaxies were redder than they should have been. In fact, and he looked at all these galaxies, he looked all around, and he realized something even more interesting. The galaxies that were further away from us were redder, even more redder than the galaxies that were close to us. So they were trying to figure out what was going on, and then they realized what it was. They realized it was the Doppler shift. Now, you've heard of the Doppler shift. They talk about it on TV all the time. But here's the Doppler shift. The Doppler shift in cars, let's say you're standing by the side of a road and on the side of the freeway, and a car comes towards you. It's going to sound like this. Now, is the car changing its sound? No. The sound that the car is making is the sound that it was making when it was right next to you. But it sounds like it has a higher pitch when it's coming towards you, because every wavefront is closer than the last wavefront. So it has a smaller wavelength, it has a higher pitch. As the car goes away from you, every wavefront is further from the last wavefront, so it has a longer wavelength, and so it has a lower pitch. So that's the Doppler shift in cars. Well, what Hubble realized is he was seeing the Doppler shift not in cars, but in stars. He realized that these stars, these galaxies, were moving away from us. Because if it was red, it means it was moving away from us. If it was blue, it's moving towards us. And he realized that these galaxies were moving away from us at something close to the speed of light. And what's interesting is that the further away from us they were, the faster they were moving away from us. So it was like it was speeding up. So they said, well, that's very interesting. Maybe there was an explosion, but an explosion is hard to understand, because if I explode something, the time that it is the fastest is at the point of the explosion, and then it gets slower and slower and slower as you get further from the explosion. But this was an explosion that was speeding up. But they said, this is interesting, though. We can calculate backwards. Let's go and look at it, and we'll go work backwards, because if it's expanding, it has to be expanding from something. And so they started studying it, and they realized that they could actually figure out the universe is expanding, and maybe they can go backwards, because if it is expanding, then it is expanding from something. And it can't be infinitely old. Why? Because it would have finished expanding eons ago, and we'd see nothing but fuzzy light out there. Imagine the universe was infinitely old, then all the galaxies would be so far away you wouldn't see them. So they said, we can calculate this. Let's go back and calculate. We'll go backwards. We'll say, well, we know how fast it's traveling. We know how fast it's traveling here and how fast it's traveling. So we know the increase in speed. So let's work backwards. And they said, okay, calculations show that the universe, light, matter, and everything suddenly came into being with a big bang about 13.7 billion years ago. Before the Big Bang, we have the singularity. This is the point at which matter and time start to exist. This turned everything upside down, because here's what we found out. The beginning of the universe, we found out there's nothing really like space and time. It's a single thing called space-time. Matter needs time to exist. Time needs energy to exist. Energy needs matter to exist. You can't have one without the other. They're all tied together. They all came into existence. In fact, you can just look at the equations, Einstein's equations, and you'll find out that they all are dependent on each other. Either it goes unstable and blows up, or it goes to zero when you turn something to zero. Well, Houston, we have a problem. What's the problem? Well, everything which has a beginning has a cause. Anything that existed forever needs no cause. The universe had no, the universe had a beginning and has not existed forever. Therefore, what is the conclusion? The universe what? Needs a cause. Now, when the person who came up with this, who was a priest, a Christian, they all made fun of him and tried to disparage what he was saying. In fact, the very name Big Bang was made in fun by an atheist. Because they were like, oh yeah, that Big Bang. In fact, and many professors were kicked out of universities or not given university tenure if they accepted the Big Bang. But then over time, they realized they couldn't get away from it. And so atheists had to deal with the problem. And so the first thing they said, oh, no problem. The universe created itself. Because otherwise, where did the universe come from? Can something do something before it exists? Can a universe create itself before it exists? And the answer obviously is no. It makes no sense whatsoever. So the atheists had to backtrack. They said, okay, here, that's fine, but so what? Right? We grant you the universe had a beginning, but what gave rise to the universe had no beginning. We're going to push it back. Right? Hyperspace or some unknown subatomic quantum agent that existed forever without cause created the singularity. Right? So they said, that existed forever agent is some unknown object. I have a hobby I have. It's arguing with AI. And one of my favorite AIs, artificial intelligence to argue with, is Bard, which is Google's thing. And I'm convinced that if AI is not biased by its programmers, it will come to the truth. So I asked AI, I said, what are the causes of the universe? He goes, oh, it's unknown. I'm like, that's not, and I gave him my argument. And I said, this is my argument. And he says, well, we don't know. I said, no, I gave you an argument. You have to refute it. And it said, well, you're right. Unless I refute the argument, I don't have a rebuttal. It agreed with me. But then it said the same thing before. We don't know. I'm like, well, you didn't answer. So it's kind of stupid, right? It's not really, it's artificial after all. But then it said, well, hyperspace or quantum particles made it. I said, well, you've got a problem here. Because if you don't have space and time and energy, you don't have hyperspace. If you don't have, he said, well, quantum vibrations. I said, if you don't have time, you can't have vibrations. He says, yes, this is a true dilemma. But we just don't know. Right? Which is fine. But this is what the atheists are doing. They're saying, okay, so what? We're just going to push the problem back, right? Okay. They say some agent created the universe. My atheist friends don't like the word God. So we're going to call this cause Agent X. Agent X caused the universe. And our job is to find out who is Agent X, or what is Agent X. What is the cause of the universe? Right? And to do that, we're going to put on our detective hats, and we're going to go through and we're going to say, well, this is what we know. When you watch a detective show, they say, well, we know the guy had blue eyes. We had a green, had a scar on his face, right? He had red hair, whatever, and you write it all down, right? So we're going to do that with Agent X, and then we'll figure out if those characteristics tell us something. So the first thing we know about Agent X is what? It's powerful enough to create a universe, right? And two, it exists forever without a cause. Right? These are the two things. You say, well, what if the thing that it was caused was created by something else? It was created by something. Well, okay, we want to go back to the very first cause, the very first agent. Okay, you guys are Russians, so you know mathematics, right? I know, it's a bias. We all have that. Right? It's like all Indians are doctors or engineers, right? Okay. All Russians are mathematicians. Okay. So I don't need to tell you this, but let's for the rest of the people, subtracting with infinity, let's 1. Infinity minus 1 equal what? Infinity. Okay. Infinity minus 1 billion equal what? Infinity. Okay. How about, now you notice I didn't say infinity minus infinity because that's undefined, right? Okay, so how about dividing with infinity? Infinity divided by 1 equal? Infinity. Infinity divided by 1 billion equal? Infinity. Okay, so, and again, we don't divide by infinity because it's undefined. So I give you that as preparation for the next point. Atheists claim there is no evidence that God did this. Agent X, they say, could be something mindless like a quantum fluctuation. Now, given the concept that you can't have fluctuation if you don't have time, fine. Let's just give them that because we'll afford it. At this point, they're in the weaker position. We'll just grant them that, okay? Fine. So let's look at item. We have two options with this mindless quantum fluctuation as the agent. Number one, the fluctuation is only going to make one universe, then stop. Option two, the fluctuation is going to make universes on a regular or irregular basis, but it's going to make universes. It can't do anything else because it doesn't have a mind. It is what we call mechanistic. Okay? So for instance, if you have a printer that prints let's say it's not working and it's just printing randomly, right? Well, if it's lasted, that printer had been there for all infinity, how many prints would you have? Infinite prints, right? But if you had a printer that was only going to print one copy, and the conditions for it printing that one copy had been there for all infinity, how long ago would that one copy have been printed? Infinity ago, right? So that's what we're going to talk about. Let's look at option one. The fluctuation is going to make one universe and then stop. So if something with no free will and no mind, like a mechanistic fluctuation, existed for all infinity outside of time and was going to create one universe, when would it have created that one universe, right? So here's the eternal universal causality line. Eternity passes way off the screen, where it would have created that one universe when? Eternity ago. Right? But the universe is not, but there's our universe, and the universe is not eternally old, nor is it eternally lasting. Here's how you think about it. William Lane Craig, by the way, is a great debater. If you ever want to feel sorry for an atheist in a debate, watch him debate an atheist. It's a fun thing. You learn a lot from him. He's a wonderful, and he's a very kind person, too. So anyway, he says, it can be plausibly argued that the cause of the universe must be a personal creator. For how else could a temporal effect arise from an eternal cause? For example, if the cause of waters being frozen is the temperature being below 0 degrees, then if the temperature were below 0 degrees from eternity, then any water present would be frozen from eternity. So the conditions were there for something to happen eternity ago, it would have happened eternity ago. The only way to have an eternal cause but a temporal effect would seem to be if the cause is a personal agent who freely chooses to create an effect in time. For example, a man sitting from eternity may will to stand up. Hence, the temporal effect may arise from eternally existing agent. So what he's saying is that if you have a universe-creating machine, a fluctuation or something that was going to create only one universe, it would have happened eternity ago because it doesn't have a mind. Now, but what about collapsing, expanding universes? If you're thinking about this, you go, well, wait a minute. How about, what if there's one universe that collapses, expands, collapses, expands, collapses, expands, okay? Well, if our universe kept collapsing, expanding after each cycle, residual energy will be left over. We would be able to measure it, but we don't see any, so scientific evidence is against this. Now, some of you sitting in the audience are saying, well, Neil, what about loop quantum cosmology? Don't worry about that. We'll deal with that next, okay? I know you're thinking about that, okay. So the next question is, but if there's no time, then couldn't all the non-time events happen at the same time, and that was just 13.7 billion years ago? You go, well, okay, there's no time, so if it was going to happen, what if that happening was 13.7 billion years ago? Well, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Let's look at the second option. Second option is a fluctuation is going to make universes on a regular basis, right? Well, here's the eternity, there's the causality line, right? So, if something with no free will, no mind, like a mechanistic quantum fluctuation, right, existed for all infinity outside of time, was going to create more than one universe. Let's say it took 1 million years to create a universe. How many universes do we have? Infinity divided by 1 million is? Let's say it was taking 1 billion years to take a universe. How many universes would we have? Infinity divided by 1 billion is? 1 billion, infinity, right? So it would be making universes on a constant basis. So now, how many universes would have been created by now? There's our universe 13.7 billion years ago. How many universes would we have if this was the option? Would be what? Infinite universes, right? This is what I talk about the multiverse, right? This is why Marvel is so good, because now you can watch the movie and you know what multiverses are. But here's the question. Are there infinite universes? The infinite universe covers loop quantum cosmology, covers atemporal causality. Each of the infinite universes are created the same non-time 13.5 billion years ago. Remember, that's where it all happens. Covers bud, fractal, spontaneously generated, randomly generated, quantum, and sequential universes. And it covers diminishingly smaller universes where they get shrink down each time. All different theories are covered under this infinite universe theory. So here's the question. Are there multiple or infinite universes? This, by the way, is called a multiverse, a name that nobody seemed to know about 20 years ago. So I would have to educate people, but now everybody knows it, thanks to Marvel. Okay, so here's the problem. There is no evidence for this. You can't see them, you can't touch them, you can't taste them, you can't smell them, you can't hear them, you can't calculate them or measure any of the effects of these infinite universes. But for atheism to be true, this has to be true. Now you go, well, is that a problem? Yes, that is a problem, because what is the atheist's major complaint about God? Isn't this complaint that they have about God? You can't see God, you can't hear God, you can't calculate Him, you can't touch Him. That's what they're saying. But now they want us to believe in the multiverse, which you also can't see anything or touch anything or calculate anything. Right? Why the sudden change in standards? I call this blind faith. I was in a debate. I was not in a debate. I had a young guy in a debate, and I was mentoring him, and he was an 18-year-old, and he was debating the 44-year-old leader of the atheists of Silicon Valley. And I was like, are you sure you're going to be? He goes, no, I got this fine, don't worry. And he beat the guy. He beat the atheist thoroughly, but using William Lane Craig's tactics. But in the Q&A part, one person said, look, you seem to advocate for the multiverse. That's your only evidence. And he says, no, you've got to believe in the multiverse. You have to believe it. Trust me, you have to believe in it. And the gal asking the question, everybody laughed. Gal said, isn't that blind faith? And I say, no blind faith. That's my ministry, right? Okay, here's the problem with the consequence of infinite universes. Well, one, there are almost infinite yous out there watching the same presentation with me, and there will be almost infinite yous out over and over and over again. You're just you and you and you, right? It's just you constantly, over and over and over and over and over again. There's a universe where whenever you toss a coin, what happened? There's a universe where whenever you toss a coin, it always comes up heads, even if you do it 1 billion times in a row. There's a universe where you're the one giving the presentation and I'm sitting where you are. That's the consequences of infinite universe, because every single possible gyration or circumstances has happened. In fact, there's a universe, and I told my atheist friend, I said, look, you don't believe this. He said, sure I do. I said, no, you don't. I said, let's say we're playing poker. Suddenly you realize I got 10 royal flushes in a row. When you jump up and shout, you're cheating, I say, not at all. We're just in that one universe where I just always happen to get a royal flush. Would you buy that? Would you think it's reasonable? If not, then why do you think this is reasonable? Right? But here's the other thing. Even with the concept of infinite universes, it doesn't work. Because the physics shows, and this was a theorem by Bohr, Guth, and Milinkin, they came up with this, shows that inflationary spacetimes are not past complete. That means even if you start calculating everything, there is no infinite universes in the past. You might argue for infinite universes in the future, but there is no infinite universes in the past, so there has to be a creation point of that first universe. Okay, so point 2 doesn't work. What does that mean? That means the first cause must be non-mechanistic. It must have what? A free will. Now, I want to put this in perspective. Mechanistic things like gravity, physics, and chemistry do the same thing over and over again. They can't suddenly decide to do something different. So if you're dealing with a mechanistic thing like gravity, you know it's going to do the same thing every time. So you're pretty safe trusting it, right? So Neil deGrasse Tyson is a scientist. He doesn't do it anymore. We used to passively aggressively mock Christianity. In this video, he explains why you can trust something mechanistic like the laws of science to do the same thing over and over again. He releases a heavy ball in a chain and knows that it won't swing back far enough to hit him. So he doesn't flinch when it switches back. Right? But remember, things are different if there's a non-mechanistic and free will agent on the other side of the ball.
So why didn't I flinch? because the laws of science differ fundamentally from those of...
Now, that was obviously modified and edited, but that's the point, right? If there is a non-mechanistic agent on the other side, this doesn't work. And it's kind of funny, so we watch it again, just because.
So why didn't I flinch? Because the laws of science differ fundamentally from those of...
By the way, I think Neil deGrasse Tyson is going to become a Christian one of these days, or at least a theist. Just if you look at his trajectory, this guy's finding the truth slowly but surely. Okay. So, what is the third thing we know about Agent X? We know that it's a non-mechanistic agent. Now, at this point, we should talk about this because this is an issue. Oh, by the way, I should cover this one. If atemporal causality, what if things happened outside of time is possible, then what if our non-time universe just started and is 13.7 years, and 13.7 billion years later, we found the Big Bang, right? Well, we will answer that shortly. I don't want you guys to forget it. So let's talk about this, though. Does the Big Bang contradict Genesis? And this is the question a lot of people have. Is the Big Bang something that the Bible and Christians should be against? Well, let's look at what atheists say about the Big Bang. Okay, we've got three Nobel-winning scientists. They've got Nobel Prizes in cosmology. So the first one is Arno Penzias. He says, and he's an atheist, he said, they're all atheists, I'm going to quote, he says, the best data we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I had nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. Here's another atheist, Robert Wilson. Certainly there was something that set it all off. I can't think of a better theory of the origin of the universe to match Genesis. And then here's George Smoot. There is no doubt that a parallel exists between the Big Bang as an event and the Christian notion of creation from nothing. So here's what you have to remember. The Big Bang is not a good name. The big controlled explosion will be more accurate, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Remember, the Big Bang is not equal to evolution. Right? This is very important that you remember that. The Bible identifies, atheists tried to reject the Big Bang but failed and were forced to accept it. The Bible describes something identical to the Big Bang. We just know who the Big Banger is, right? But the Bible says human evolution did not happen. These are two separate issues. So don't confuse the Big Bang with evolution. Evolution is a theory in crisis, right? The evolution is a theory in crisis today. It is dying. Every day they find more evidence that causes problems with evolution. Like recently, not recently, but many years ago, they found the caveman explosion that kind of said, oh, well, there's not enough time. And then so they came up with a theory called punctuated equilibrium, which means you don't need any fossil evidence. They're all trying to make up for the problems that it has. And even today, it's having even more problems because they're finding more about DNA. First of all, we all evolved from the tree of life. Today, there is no tree of life because we have DNA that's in a banana. We have similar DNA. There's DNA in us that came from a banana. Well, or we gave it to the banana. Banana gave it to us. How? How did we evolve from a banana? But it's on a different tree. It's on a different branch. So now they're not talking about the tree of life. They're talking about the shrub of life. Right? Everything is intertied together. And so it's got problems. Okay. Though there's some pushback from a few stubborn atheists on the Big Bang theory is not in crisis. Every day we get more confirmation. So this is what I say if you're witnessing to an atheist. Okay? When you're witnessing to an atheist, time dilation could explain the 13.7 billion years. You're like, wait a minute, 7 days, 13.7. There are lots of ways to explain that. One, if you look at the time dilation calculation, the outer edge of the universe is expanding close to the speed of light. Just yesterday, my son, he's 8, was trying to calculate how fast the outer edge of the universe is moving. And I said, well, it's actually, at this point, we think it's actually faster than the speed of light. So we'll never be able to see the outer edge. Anyway, the outer edge is expanding close to the speed of light. Time slows down for you when you travel at the speed of light, relative to someone not moving in the center. So if Genesis 1 is written from the perspective of the event horizon, that is God, then time is much slower out there than they are inside. So if you look at the calculation there, if the outer edge is traveling at 0.9999993, 13.8 billion years is 6 days. So you can play with that any way you want, okay? The second option is that eons versus days could explain it. You know, the Old Testament is talking about the translation, because the word yom can be translated as eon. It can also be translated as day. It can also be translated daylight. It can also be translated as the day off, the day of Adam, the day of David. Most importantly, don't get hung up on the 6 days versus 6 eons. That's an in-family argument. When you're arguing with an atheist, do not focus on the 6 days. You will end the argument there. He will just walk away. Every time I've talked to an atheist, if I brought that in, that's been the end. They're like, ha ha, I don't even want to talk to you, and he leaves. So why do you want to stop there? Why do you want to die on that hill? Don't die on that hill. Don't get stuck. Secondly, don't get stuck with trying to disprove evolution. It's too much work. When I was younger, I would get into evolution argument after evolution argument after evolution argument, but then the next day there would be something new, and then I'd have to explain it, and then something new, and I'd have to explain it, right? So it just got too much work. Don't start trying to prove the Bible is accurate. Save that for next. If there is no God, who cares about the Bible, right? So first prove there's God, go in steps. First prove there's God, then go to the Bible, right? So you first want to prove that God exists, and it's easy enough to use the science the atheist already accepts to do that. Now be careful though, I've had atheists come up to me and says, well, okay, in that case, I don't believe in the Big Bang. I'm like, you're so unscientific, it's pitiful. Like, have you studied the Big Bang? You know, it's critical for your belief system. You know, so point 1 was the universe is not external. Point 2, it is fine-tuned. Let me explain this. Besides having a beginning, there were 3 other factors we noted. The Big Bang is so fine-tuned that even slight variations would cause instability or collapse or destroy the universe in our life. That's what we found out. They were doing the equations for the universe, and they found out some very interesting things. For instance, if the ratio of electrons to protons had varied by 1 in 10 to the minus 37, no stars would form if it was less than 1 in 10 to the minus 7. It was plus 1 proton more, then no planets would form. So you've got this whole dilemma of how these things are. For instance, the ratio of electromagnetic force to gravity, if it had been 1 in 10 to the minus 40 less, then the stars would burn up too fast. It was more, there would be no heavy elements. Expansion rate of the universe, no galaxies would form. It was either anywhere on that, 1 less or 1 more. The mass of the universe, the stars would burn too rapidly for life. If it was 1 less than 10 to the minus 59, and there would be insufficient helium and no heavy elements, it was 1 point more in 10 to the minus 59. Now, let me put those in perspective. I've just given you those numbers. You're like, oh, those are huge numbers. So let me give you the first number. The first number is the 1 in 10 to the minus 37. Imagine you're making a cake, and you're using a recipe that used 286 million trillion pounds of sugar. That's equivalent to all the grains of sand on 100 million Earths. But it was so sensitive that if you added 1 more grain of sugar than that exact amount, the whole cake would fall flat or explode or kill anyone who ate it. That's the fine-tuning. 1 grain of sand more in 100 million Earths, and that's just the first one. Now let's look at the second one. That's 1 grain of sand difference in 100 billion Earths. The third one is 1 grain of sand in 10 trillion Earths, and the last one is 1 grain of sand in 100,000 trillion Earths. It's so fine-tuned that if you had moved that scale slightly in any direction, the universe would not exist or would not be able to have any stars or planets. I'm not even talking about life. There's like 93 of those just for the universe, and then there's another 100 just for life to exist on Earth. So obviously, whoever Agent X was, it is knowledgeable enough to create a fine-tuned universe. By the way, this idea came to me because I had an argument with a Russian friend, interesting enough. I was sharing all the other things. He said, well, maybe it was an accident. Some explosion didn't happen. And so then I said, well, I got to put in the fine-tune argument. And I said, Agent X has to know how to create a universe. Okay. Let's go back to temporal causality. I keep teasing you about that. Okay, if things happening, being caused outside of time is possible, what if our non-time universe just started and 13.7 billion years we found the Big Bang? Well, here's the reality. What are the chances you get this perfectly fine-tuned universe? You need close to infinite universes to get this level of fine-tuning, and thus you're back at the infiniverse. See that? So even if you say, well, everything happened at this time, at this non-time, and now we're 13.7 billion years ago, how would you get this perfectly tuned universe, right? Okay. Which I just don't have enough faith to believe in, by the way. So, point number 3. The Earth seems to be designed for discovery. Or everything seems to be designed for discovery. Let me explain. Earth seems to be in a very special location that seems to allow for scientific discovery, plus all the physics and math seems to work out. For instance, the equations that define the universe reduce to simple, humanly comprehensible equations. There's no natural requirement for this to be so. For instance, E is equal to mc squared. Now, you and I know that the real equation is different. But the idea is, in addition, this knowing that we have a simple equation allows us to know that we get to the correct answer. Let me give an example. When they were calculating the equations for certain things, they would see, oh, this is a very complicated equation. They'll say, well, there's something wrong with this equation. They would go back and they'd start doing more research, and the equation would get less complicated and less complicated until it came into our most elegant equations like this. So that's the real equation for E equal mc squared at the top there, right? But it's a very elegant, because it's actually a matrix. Here's Maxwell's equations for light. I used to have a T-shirt in college that said, and then God said, and he goes Maxwell's equations, and then said, and then there was light, right? Because that's what light is made out of, right? So we know that these equations are simple. Why are they simple? There's no good reason for they're simple. The universe is some randomly created thing. Why are these equations so simple? Next, we have a transparent atmosphere on Earth. Why do we? Many planets have no atmosphere or have an opaque atmosphere like Saturn or Jupiter. There's no requirement for life to have a transparent atmosphere, right? But there is a requirement for life to have a radiation protective atmosphere. Why is this important? Because we have a transparent atmosphere, this allows early scientists and amateurs to actually see way out there and study cosmology. The only reason we have something called astronomy and cosmology is because we had the ability to look at the stars and look at the cosmos and study it. Imagine if we had a thick cloud cover, we'd never be able to see that. Next thing is our location in the spiral arm. We are here. That's where we are in the Milky Way galaxy. This is where we are. If you look at the side view, we're down there. Now, this is very important. Why is this important? Because if we were too low, too deep, or too close to the interior arms, we'd never be able to see past our own galaxy to discover the Big Bang. Let me give you an example. This is our closest nebula, Sharpless 216, right? This is the Tarantula Nebula. What if we were as close to Tarantula as we were to Sharpless 216? Okay, let's say tomorrow morning we wake up and we find, or tomorrow night we wake up and we find that Sharpless has been replaced with Tarantula. So our location in the spiral galaxy has moved, so we are close to one of these huge nebulas. Okay, well, here's what's going to happen. When you walk out tonight and you look at Sharpless, that's what it looks like. If we were as close to Tarantula as we were to Sharpless in the Milky Way galaxy, you would walk out and you'd see this. There would be shadows at midnight. We'd never be able to find the Doppler shift in stars. We'd never be able to do a number of studies that we do today with cosmology. We would not be educated in cosmology at all. Something wants us to discover the Big Bang Theory, as I'm going to show you in just a minute. Who's this silly patent clerk from Switzerland? Anybody know who that was? He came up with an idea. His idea was gravity can move light. And people were like, oh, you're crazy. He says, no. He said, they're like, you're just a patent clerk. What do you know? He said, look, if I have a heavy object and I have a light behind it, it will look like the heavy object is actually to the left, not behind it, because the gravity, the light will curve around the heavy object. They said, okay, so what do you need? You need like a mountain or a house or something? He said, no. I need something really big. Like what? Well, the sun. I need the sun. So if I can stand on this side of the earth I go on this side of the sun, and I can look and I can see a star that is actually on the other side of the sun, then my theory is proven. They're like, yeah, good luck with that. How are you going to do that? Well, he said, there is a way to do it. Well, how can you do that? You've got to, because here's the problem. If you've got a star that's behind the sun, it's not bright enough for you to see if the sun is there, because the sun's right there. You have to cover the sun with something so you can see the star behind it. But here's the problem, and it can't be inside our atmosphere because of the diffraction. It has to be outside our atmosphere. We need to have just the right size object to cover the sun. If it's too big, then you cover the star also. That looks like it's curved. If it's too small, then you don't cover the sun and you can't see the star. So too small is too bright to see anything else. Too far away, and our calculations are imprecise, right? If you're trying to do some other sort of calculation, you've got to have something in the right place. You need something that is exactly the right ratios, and we have something called the what? The moon. You see, the moon, you need a moon just about the right ratios. Guess what? The moon is about 400 times smaller and 400 times closer than the sun. You know that in all the galaxies and all the solar systems we've studied, there's not a single planet out there that has the same ratio between its star and its satellite, except for the Earth. Why? Who was that scientist? Anybody know the name? His name was Albert Einstein. And overnight, he became famous. In fact, it was during the First World War, and he was in Germany, and so he couldn't get out, and there was a British guy who was a pacifist in England, and he traveled to South Africa to do this experiment, and and you can see actually the pictures they took. Those are the pictures they took showing the experiment. Somebody wants us to find the Big Bang Theory. Okay? Well, somebody will say, my atheist will say, oh, but we could have verified the theory of relativity some other way. Yes, but when you add it to the transparent atmosphere, the location of the spiral arm, the fact that the moon is moving away from the Earth, and this relationship won't be there in another few million years, the fact that the moon is moving away from the Earth, and all the other details, things start to seem less random. We're finding guns and motive and blue eyes suddenly all over the place. So, Agent X characteristic number 5 is he wants us to discover him using science. So I said there were 4 major points. This is the last point we're going to cover. This is dimensions. What we found out is that there are 10 dimensions. For brief moments after the Big Bang, there were 10 dimensions, if not more. These disappeared to our senses after a Planck's time, which is 10 to the minus 23 seconds. Like 10 dimensions? Well, we have height, length, and width. What is the other dimension we know of? Anybody know? Time. It's half a dimension, right? So time is the half dimension that we have left. So height, width, and time. But at the Big Bang, there was also a 4th spatial dimension. In fact, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and 9th spatial dimension. There were 5 other spatial dimensions. Sorry, 6 other spatial dimensions. You go, wait, that doesn't make sense. How do you have a spatial? Where is it? Well, I'm going to show you a video here. It's a video of what it would be like if you were a 2-dimensional creature and you ran into a 3-dimensional creature, and we can extrapolate from that. So here's the video. If you can turn off the lights, I don't know if you can.
Welcome to Flatland, a world of only 2 dimensions. Only forwards and backwards, left and right. In this world, there is no up and no down.
I said to Ray, where's Dottie? He said, well, she's out in line. Huh?
Where's that from? What the bleep is that thing? Huh?
In this world, the 2-dimensional beings that live here have no concept of 3-dimensional objects. These 2-dimensional flatlanders have no understanding of cubes, spheres, tetrahedrons, or yours truly. From their 2D perspective, my 3D finger looks something like this.
What the planet is that?
Hello, little circle. Fear of the unknown. Or should I say, not yet known. It's a puzzle. If we see only what we know, how does anyone ever see anything new? The unknown. How do we ever get out of our box? Hello, little circle. Don't be afraid.
Who said that? Where are you?
This is always the tricky part to explain. I'm in another dimension, another space. I am above you.
No, never use that word.
What word?
The A word.
Above?
It's forbidden.
Well, what do you think it means?
I don't know. And I don't want to know. You can be severely punished if you use that word. Are you a ghost?
I hope not. I just have a different perspective than you do. I can see things in a way you can't yet.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, okay, you have a safe hidden in your pantry. And inside it, you have 12 coins, a will, and a passport.
How did you know that? What are you? Are you a god?
Well, nope. You see, since I am above you, in the third dimension, I can see inside things in your world.
Third dimension? You are a crazy ghost. There's only two. Look.
So, if I were to touch the inside of your stomach, how would I do that?
Well, you'd have to cut through my skin. Otherwise, it's impossible. Stop! Stop! No.
Ready for more?
More what?
Dimensions.
Oh,
Directions.
no. Yes, but there aren't any. More? What will happen to me? What will I become?
You'd have to become it to know.
Okay.
Excellent.
I never knew.
Isn't it funny? That which we are most afraid of is what thrills us the most.
Dimensions, directions. So at the point of the Big Bang, for 10 to the minus 23 seconds, there were up to 10 dimensions. Now, how did they calculate that? Well, one of the ways they calculated is that they were trying to figure out the equations with 4 dimensions, and it was very ugly. They said, well, we know that it should be a more simple, elegant equation, so they threw a dimension in there. And the equations got smaller and cleaner. And then they threw another dimension in there, it got even cleaner and smaller, and then they kept going, and when they hit 10 dimensions, it became this beautiful, symmetric matrix. And when they put one more in, it blew apart. So they said, something's going on here, and that's when they started doing the research for 10 dimensions. But let's talk about the 10 dimensions. Well, first of all, we don't know what the dimensions are, what the 10 dimensions are. Did I lose my... There we go. We don't know what the 10 dimensions are, but we can try and imagine what they would be like. So let's imagine if we were a two-dimensional creature like that, two-dimensional creature, we would not understand a cube, because we are two-dimensional. But if somebody unfolded that cube, it would look like this. And then we would be able to say, oh, look, it's unfolded. It looks like this, right? But we would have no idea what it looked like folded. But we'd just say, OK, I know how to unfold it. Well, what if there was a 4-dimensional cube? What would it look like? It's called a tesseract or a hypercube, right? So you've heard that word tesseract. So let's study what that would look like. Now, a square is really a 2-dimensional cube, right? We use the word cube, but a two-dimensional object. So the square has 4 lines. If you fold them together, it becomes a square, right? The cube, so that square is 2-dimensional, has 4 sides. Each side is a line, right? How about a cube? A cube is what? 3-dimensional. How many sides does it have? 6 sides, and each side is what? A square, right? So it has 6 sides, each side is a square. So there was a four-dimensional cube, a tesseract or hypercube, right? It's four-dimensional. How many sides would it have? Well, if we're just following this, it would be what? How many sides? 8 sides, right? And each side would be what? Would be a cube, right? One dimension lower than that. So that's what a hypercube looks like. But we don't know what it looks like out there. But we could unfold a hypercube, right? Because it's in 4 dimensions. If we unfold a hypercube into 3 dimensions, we'd be able to see what it looks like in 3 dimensions, right? So we're going to unfold a hypercube for you in 3 dimensions. You ready for this? This is what a hypercube looks like unfolded in 3 dimensions. See? 8 cubes. How does it fold up together? We have no idea. But here's something we can do, is we can try to look at what it would look like in a shadow format, right? So look, for instance, this is a cube. We know these 2 sides are the same size, but because of perspective, they look like they're different shapes, right, and sizes. But if I, excuse me, if I took a cube and I rotated it, so that's a cube in 2 dimensionals. If I rotate it, every time it rotates into my space, I would see a square and another square, right? Each of those edges is squares. Oh, I can see that. I can, even though it's not a square when it's drawn normally. Okay, well, so what if I had a 4-dimensional cube and I was able to rotate it? Now understand it. I'm showing it to you in 2 dimensions. So I'm going to take a 4-dimensional cube. I'm going to rotate it in 3 dimensions, but I'm going to represent it in 2 dimensions. So what you're really seeing is like the shadow of it. Okay? So ready for a 4-dimensional cube, rotate it into our space. There's a cube. There's a cube. There's a cube. Remember, this is just the shadow of what it is out there. We have no idea what it actually looks physically, because we don't have the capability to understand it. But there are some things we can tell about it. Imagine you had a hypersphere. Let's say I had a hypersphere, that's a 4-dimensional sphere, and I brought it into our space. What would it look like? So I'm going to keep the whole hypersphere together, but I'm just going to bring it in. I would see slices of it in 3-dimensional space. So first let's look at a circle into 1-dimensional space and then a ball into 2-dimensional space. So here's a circle. As I bring it into 1-dimensional space, you see as the tip of the circle touches the line, which is 1-dimensional, I see a dot, and it grows to the full diameter of the circle, and then it shrinks back down. So let's say I had a 3-dimensional a sphere, and I brought it onto a 2-dimensional plane. Let's say I brought it to a table. As I hit the table, first you'd see a dot, and then it would grow to the full size of the diameter of the diameter of the sphere, and then it would shrink back down again, okay? So this is basically what you're seeing. You see it hits the table or the plane, 2-dimensional plane, and then you see a dot, and then you see it grows into a circle and goes. So if I had a 4-dimensional sphere, a hypersphere, and I brought it into our space, the first thing you'd see is a dot, but then the next thing you'd see a small sphere. And that sphere would grow to the biggest sphere it is in this our space, so it would be something like this. So here's a 3D sphere intersecting a 2D space, and here's a hypersphere intersecting a 3D plane. So watch. The hypersphere grows, and it shrinks down, and then the first thing I see is a small sphere, and it grows to a bigger sphere, and then the biggest point is the biggest sphere size it is in our space. Why is that important? Because imagine I had a sphere coming into this space right now. First I'd see a small dot, and then I'd see a small sphere. It would grow to a big sphere, and then it would shrink back down and disappear again. And the whole time it would look like it was flying, because nothing in front of it, nothing under it, nothing above, nothing anywhere around it. It was all flying. It was coming to a space. But it need not be flying at all, because in 4 dimensions, right? Let's imagine that you were a 2-dimensional creature, and I stuck my finger through here. You would think that there were 3 of me. Right? Imagine that there was a wall here. What would the wall look like to a 2-dimensional creature? It would be a line. And if I put 4 walls, you would not be able to get into that room, 2-dimensional room, unless I could step over it. I, as a 3-dimensional creature, can just step right over it. You would need a door to go in it. Now, what does it all mean? Well, first of all, here's what it means. What is a wall to a 2-dimensional being? It's a line. What is a room to a 2-dimensional being? It's 4 lines. But a 4-dimensional being could easily step over the wall. How did Jesus get into the upper room? He stepped over the wall. As a multidimensional being, he stepped over the wall. His new body was a multidimensional body. I've just explained angels and demons. And by the way, I've just been using science here the whole time. I've just explained angels and demons. The angel appears, it shimmers, it looks really weird. What's the first thing people see when they say an angel? They go, do not fear. Why? Because it's so scary. Some weird thing that you see. And then it coalesces into a human being. That's their shape in 3 dimensions. And then it disappears again. What about heaven and hell? Is heaven above, or is it above multidimensional? Is hell a lower dimension? Or where is it? And then what's most important is you don't have a soul / spirit. No, I'm serious. You don't have a soul. I'm like, oh, is this heresy? We talked about it on Tuesday. You don't have a soul. You are a soul. What you have is a body. This is not you. This is merely the body that your soul is controlling. And so when you die, this dies, but you don't die. You just go to another dimension of existence. So what is it like to die? You move into a dimension of, right now, you look around, you see 10-dimensional colors. Imagine, 3-dimensional colors. I designed a TV that gives you great 3-dimensional colors. Dolby Vision. But imagine if you had 10-dimensional colors, right? Now you're going to go out and eat something, or you're going to have dinner, and you're going to eat in 3 dimensions. Imagine if you were eating in 10 dimensions. Ladies, think of 10-dimensional chocolate. Kids, think of 10-dimensional pizza. Anyway, but the point is that's what science says is coming. Right now, you go, well, wait. This is, where does it say this in the Bible? Quite a few places. Let's look at 2 Kings 6. The king of Aram sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh, no, my lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed, open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and he saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. What did he do? He just opened his multidimensional ability to see. That Elisha obviously could see. So one of the things the prophets have is the ability to see. And what does the Bible say? It says, and you go, well, man, Neil, this is all science fiction. No, it isn't. We built this Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland. To do what? To send particles into the 4th dimension. On a fun note, this is Salvador Dali's painting that he did in 1954. I never liked Salvador Dali until I was doing this research, and I read his explanation of it. This is Corpus Hypercubus. Salvador Dali said, this shows that Christ died for all men in all dimensions. So why is this all important? Well, this is important because prior to because this means Agent X must be outside of time and space and outside of the universe. Why? Because prior to the singularity, time and space do not exist, nor do these other dimensions. So whatever caused the singularity did so outside and previous to time and space and any dimension existing. It's not multidimensional, but extra-dimensional. In other words, the guy in that video is not God. At the most, he would be like an angel or a demon. But he's not God, because God is not in the dimensions. Agent X created the dimensions, so he's outside of the dimensions. Remember this. And here's something that I always throw at atheists. I say, look, at the beginning of the Big Bang, matter needs time, time needs energy, energy needs matter. So whatever caused the Big Bang, what? You can't have one without the other. So Agent X is not made of what? Matter, does not need time, energy, and is not constrained by time, right? So Agent X is not material or physical. Isn't that what we've been saying about God the whole time? The creator of the universe is not material, physical or physical. So, That's what the Bible says. Okay, let's look at this. Number 6, right? So we know powerful enough to create a universe, exists forever without a cause, non-mechanistic agent, knowledgeable enough to create a fine-tuned universe, wants to discover him using science. And number 6, not constrained by time or space, cause time or space. And by the way, in the video, could that two-dimensional being hide from a three-dimensional being? No, because it was flat. Could a three-dimensional being hide from a four-dimensional being? No, because it's flat. Could a 10-dimensional being hide from an extra-dimensional being, a non-dimensional being? No, because it all looks flat to them. So, what does that mean? We've got these 4 major points. We've come up with these 6 characteristics of Agent X. Not use the Bible in any of this, right? Just boom, boom, boom. Okay, powerful enough to create a universe, we call that what? Omnipotent. Right? Not constrained by time and space, we call that omnipresent in time and space. God is everywhere. You can't hide from him because he can see you. Everything's flat to him. Not only in time, but also in space. You can't hide in a cave. He can see right through you, just like that two-dimensional being. Knowledgeable enough to create a fine-tuned universe. What do we call that? We call it omniscient. It means he knows everything. Wants us to discover him using science. We call that personal. Exists forever without a cause. We call that eternal and created. Non-mechanistic agent. We call that what? Free will and a mind. So, if I take all these things together, eternal, uncreated, highest free will, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, personal, does this sound like a quantum particle? So I tell my atheist friends, I don't know about you, but this is what I personally define as God. Now, did I use the Bible to prove any of that? Or rather, did I just prove the Bible knew what it was saying all along? And by the way, this evidence convinces a lot of atheists. Now, Anthony Flew was the founder of the Royal Society of Atheists. He was one of the leading atheists. He became a deist. He didn't become a theist. He didn't live long enough to become a theist, but I think he would have. I want to answer a real quick question. Where did Agent X/God come from? What was before God? You get this question a lot. People say, hey, where did God come from? Where did Agent X come from? I already answered this, but I'm going to give you the answer. Remember, everything which has a beginning has a cause. Anything that exists forever needs no cause. Agent X existed forever, right? Prior to singularity, time and space do not exist. So Agent X created space, created time. Therefore, Agent X is outside of time. Agent X is outside of space. Okay, so when you ask, where did Agent X come from? What was before God? This is a stupid question. Why? Because there was no before created time. God created time. You can't ask the question if there is no time, because you need time for the word before to have and make any sense. And until God created time, there was no word before. Same thing, where did God come from? Again, there was no from before God created space. It's a stupid question. How do you remember all this? We have a book. Oh, I should add this. This is just the first Big Bang. There are 14 Big Bangs. So this is the first of 14. So the Big Bang is the Big Bang of the universe. There are so many answers that the atheists have to deal with. One is the Big Bang of the universe. 2 is the Big Bang of life. Where did life come from? The study of life has been failing miserably, right? The Big Bang of morality. Is there an objective morality? We talked about that briefly on Tuesday. The Big Bang of free will. Where did we get our free will from? If we're all accidental, where do you get free will? The Big Bang consciousness and sentience. Where did consciousness come from? It doesn't evolve physically. Consciousness is something that's not physical. How about the Big Bang of reason and rationality? Why can we reason things? Why can we rationalize things? Why do things make sense? The Big Bang of Christ and his resurrection. How did Jesus rise from the dead? Which is the class I do. The Big Bang of the complexity of life forms, i.e. not evolution. How do you answer the complexity of life forms since evolution is failing? The Big Bang of truth. Evolution cannot arrive at truth. There's a whole bunch of information about this. Evolution does not guarantee truth in any sense of the word. So how do we know that we know the truth about evolution, since evolution can't guarantee truth? The Big Bang of the appearance of intelligence. Why do things appear to be intelligent, right? Is it all artificial? The Big Bang of the biblical text is having to be able to predict the Big Bang prior to science being able to tell this. The Big Bang of language. We have proto-languages, but we don't have any undeveloped proto-languages. Where did language come from? They just pop. Every language we found is right there. I had this argument with Bard. He says, where are the where are the pre-proto languages? He says, there are no pre-proto languages. I said, well, then where did languages come from? Well, it's hard to determine. I'm like, is there any evidence that there's a partial language? Well, maybe we just haven't found it yet. That's not an argument. The Big Bang of the transcendent arts, logic, mathematics, and set theory. I don't need the universe for 1 + 1 to be equal to 2. Mathematics is transcendent, right? If there's no universe, you still have mathematics. If there's no universe, you don't have physics, you don't have biology, and you don't have chemistry. But you do have mathematics, you do have set theory, you do have logic, you do have rationality. Where did they come from? Why did they exist without a universe? And then, of course, the finally Big Bangs of science inability to prove certain things that we know to be true. For instance, as I started this, I can't prove, and you can't prove, that you weren't put here 5 seconds ago with the memory of the past. We don't think that's reasonable, but we can't prove it. So there's some things we have to take logically and rationally and say this is reasonable, right? I was not going to say faith because we don't want to have to have blind faith. We have to rationally and reasonably do it. So these are the steps that I talked about. And of course, normally if I'm doing this, I would go through all this. But I want to close with this thing. So you guys have been here long enough. You've been a great audience. We have a book out there. You can go on Amazon and look me up, Who's Agent X, or look up my name. You'll find it. And then we did a kid's version of the book. That's my daughter's. So let me close with this. If God is outside of time, and by the way, some philosophers think God had to put himself in time, otherwise it doesn't make sense. And that's probably true. But if God is outside of time, it explains a lot of things. He can listen to all 6 billion of our prayers at the same time. He can attend to each one of us individually. C.S. Lewis says, suppose I'm writing a novel. I write, Mary laid down her work. Next moment came a knock at the door. For Mary was to live in the imaginary time of my story, there is no interval between putting down the work and hearing the knock. But I, who am Mary's maker, do not live in the imaginary time at all. Between writing the first half of that sentence and the second, I might sit down for 3 hours and think steadily about Mary. I could think about Mary as if she was the only character in the book and for as long as I pleased. And the hours I spent in doing so would not appear in Mary's time, the time inside the story at all. So what that means is when you pray, God is paying attention to only you and nobody else. Everything has ceased to exist except for you. And when you worship, it's a private performance for the Lord. Oh, you want to take a picture of it? By the way, Boris has all these slides. Boris, you're welcome to share them, the PDF. Okay. So, if God is outside of time and space, asking that you find God in creation is like Hamlet running about on stage expecting to find Shakespeare somewhere in the props. The only way Hamlet could find Shakespeare is if Shakespeare had written himself into the play. Yet, through the Old Testament, through Christ, and by creating the world for discovery and science, God has done exactly that. Thank you very much. Okay, we've gone long. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I don't know when you wanted to end. Any questions? Yes, go ahead. Yes, you could. I didn't do it because it's a tougher argument with atheists, but you could certainly, in fact, a lot of philosophers add beauty to one of the Big Bangs. Where did beauty come from? Because you don't need a universe for beauty. The concept of beauty can exist without the universe, yeah. But I don't add it because it's an argument, and that I'm just trying to take the easy things. Any other questions? So, yeah, you could publish. It's already on there, but yeah, you certainly publish it on the YouTube channel. No problems. The best way to get this is to get the book, and you can go through the book, and then once you understand the arguments, you can talk. Because here's the deal: I don't expect you to be an expert in everything. So I always say, if you want to argue with an atheist, say, hey, go watch this video or go read this book. And if you have any questions, my email is in the book. I get emails from atheists all the time. And we get into this dialogue, and after a while, they just go away because they can't. I keep coming, you've got to refute my argument, refute my argument, refute my argument. And they can't. Right? Because everything I've said is accepted in science. All I've done, and there's nothing new here. All I've done is taken everything together and put it in one place, right? Yes, well, not my friend. I was on lots of people. In fact, I had a friend who was at church, and the pastor said, "Oh, go talk to Neil." He was an atheist, but he came to church because he wanted his kids to have a proper upbringing, right? But he was a complete atheist. He had lunch with me, and I started going through all these things with him, and he, not only did he, and I said, "Look, you should keep a journal because you're going to become a Christian." Not because I knew, it's just his attitude was such. His attitude was open. I said, it's not because I'm such a great arguer, but because you're open to this. I said, you're going to be a Christian soon. He became a Christian. His whole family was baptized, became Christians, was baptized. His son is in the ministry. I mean, it's just a beautiful thing. And then we were on a radio show, my wife and I were on a radio show with Frank Turek called Cross-Examined. And it wasn't even about this. I wasn't even talking about it. We were talking about something that happened in our life. And so the guy looked up my name, went and bought my book, Who's Agent X, and he writes me this email. He says, "Hi, I was a Christian. I left the faith, became an atheist. I heard you on Frank's show. I got the book. I've become a Christian. I have a friend in Redwood City, which is near San Jose. He needs to become a Christian too. Can you have lunch with him?" So I had lunch with his friend, and again, just showed him the book. He read it. These guys are really intelligent people who enjoy the detail about it, but they're not so arrogant that they hate God and they think they're... So the reality is, and I'll tell you a sad story about it. So this friend became a Christian too, right? So here's the reality. When I wrote this book, I was working at Dolby, and the guy next to me was a hardcore atheist. He'd grown up in the Baha'i faith, but he was just an atheist, complete atheist. So when I was writing the book, I would have discussions with him. He said, "So let me see your book." So I said, "Okay." So I gave him the book before it was published, and he started editing it. I mean, literally, he took the book and he would make notes. He said, "This is a good argument. This is a bad argument." It was great. And when I was done, I said, "Look, you've helped me so much because most of the times I just bounce arguments off people, but you're actually reading the argument." He said, "Yeah, thank you. It's great to be able to help you." I said, "Well, can I put your name as one of the editors?" He goes, No, please don't." And then I said, "Well, what do you think of after you've read the whole argument? What is your conclusion?" He says, "I'm just going to have to go with the infinite universe theory." Meaning he wanted to remain an atheist, and the only thing he could glom onto was that infinite universe theory, because he'd read the whole thing really well. I mean, he understood it, and he said that was his only out. And so the reality was that he didn't want to admit that God exists. So he hates the God that he doesn't want to exist, right? He was a nice guy, but something in his life he hated. In the end, it's not about rational thinking, but they will use rational thinking as a screen to get you that. So your job is to get beyond that and say, look, why is it that you really hate God? And most atheists, but you can't jump there. They'll say, I don't hate God. Right? If you jump there, they're like, no, I don't hate God. Right? But if you get to that point slowly, when everything, it's like I've showed you this, I've showed you this, I've showed you this, I've showed you this. Why do you not want to accept God? Is it because you hate him? And then the truth comes out. And in most cases, it's because my father died when I was young. My sister had cancer. This is the problem of evil that we did on Tuesday. Why are you so upset at God? Because something happened. Well, let me explain that God is not responsible. I mean, he's responsible. He created the world, but he's not. This is the reason why those things happen. So that's why that talk. That's always the sixth talk I give. Is how does evil exist? Why does evil exist? So that's an important thing to know too. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, thank you all. If you And I'll be back next spring. So if you want to do more of these, let me know.